Hi, it's Pavel with a C# exercise from the book Visual C#, How to Program. This is chapter 8, exercise 12, duplicate elimination. And we are going to be using some arrays and loops. We will be using a one-dimensional array to solve the following problem. We will write an app that inputs 5 numbers, each of which is between 10 and 100 inclusive. As each number is read, display it only if it's not a duplicate of the number already read. In other words, if I enter 10 and then I enter 10 again, it will not read it or display it. Provide for the worst case in which all 5 numbers are different. Basically, if we enter 5 numbers and each of them is different, then we need 5 elements in the array. Use the smallest possible array to solve the problem, which I just said is going to be 5 because that would be the worst case. Now display the complete set of unique values input after the user inputs each new value. In other words, user enters a value, and after that we will input all the values that are distinct up to that point. Then he enters another value, we will enter the new distinct values, and so forth 5 times because we are entering 5 numbers. Okay, so I'm going to declare a variable called number. That's going to be the number entered, and I will declare a boolean that will be, I will just call it number in and declare it to false or initialize it to false. This I will be using against the I will set this to true if the number that the user enters is or has been already entered before. Another thing I need is a counter, which I initialize to 0. That's because when the counter equals, we will count how many numbers have been entered. We are entering 5 numbers, so when the counter equals 4, because it starts from 0, then all the numbers were entered. And finally, we will need, of course, the array, and it's going. I'll just call it numbers, and it's a new integer array with 5 elements. That's, like I said, if all 5 numbers are different, then the numbers array will hold 5 elements. Okay, so now I will declare the loop, which is the, like I said, until the counter is less than 5, so 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then we will be entering the numbers. Okay, so I will write console.writeLine. Please enter a number between 10 and 100. And the number that the user enters we will put into our variable number. So that equals convert to integer 32 read line. I'm sorry, convert to integer 32 console.readLine, of course, console.readLine. So now we have the number, user entered a number, and now we have to see if it was already entered or not. But before we do that, first we need to make sure that it's between 10 and 100. They want us to make sure that it's between 10 and 100 inclusive. So I will declare another while loop over here that will loop until the user enters correct number. So while the number is not correct, which means it's less than 10 or is greater than 100, then it was the wrong number entered, so we will simply inform the user, write line, please, I will just copy this, there you go, like that. We will simply ask him to re-enter the number, and again we will assign whatever he inputs into our variable number. And if it's still not good, it comes over here, it checks it, and not good, well, display it again, and we will loop that until the number is greater than 10 and less than 100. So okay, so now yeah, now we can so after we check the input, we'll go and do the check to see if the number was already entered before, if it's a duplicate. So if integer I equals 0, I is less than 5, well, let's go with the numbers dot length. It's always better than hard coding actual number, because if you change the the length of the array, then we don't have to come over here and manipulate it anymore. And of course I++. And now we will simply check if the number, that's the latest number that the user entered, equals any of the numbers in the array as we loop through it. So numbers element I or index I, then our boolean numbers in will become true, because we have a duplicate. The number that the user entered is already not number but numbers in the array. So basically it just goes over here and it loops as many times as there are numbers in the array, and if it encounters one that matches the number that is entered, then it will return true as a duplicate. So so now we can simply evaluate where we are. So still within the loop, we'll go and if this is still false, then it means that the number entered is not a duplicate, and we can add it to the array. So if not number in other words, if it's still a false, because this becomes true only if there is a duplicate found. If it is not, then it will still remain to be false. But if it's still false, then we'll add the numbers, the number into our array of numbers. But it's not going to be as our index. Now we will use the counter. That's why we have the counter. We count, that's why I started from 0, because now it can actually serve as an index for our array. So our counter equals the number. Okay, because this is actually like an inner loop within the while loop. The while loop is one number at a time. This for loop loops through all the numbers in the array. So the counter actually equals the number that we are entering, the index, so to speak, or the order of the number. So at the beginning, our counter will equal 0, so that's our like a first number to enter. Then it will equal 1, then 2, and so forth. So if this number is false, in other words, if it's not a duplicate, then we will add it to our array. Now we can go and output the array. We are supposed to, after each entry, we are supposed to display the complete set of unique values that were input by that until then. So console.writeLine, and I will say distinct elements, and you know what, let me just make it console.write, like I will put everything in one line. I think it will be better formatted. And so this is like the header, like the first thing that will be on the line, and after that it will simply say something like, at the end it will look something like 10, 20, 30. That's how I want to format it. So the distinct elements, and now I will output the distinct elements. So I will do for each loop, and element, just whatever you call it, doesn't matter. I'll just call it E. In the array of numbers, not number, but numbers. That's the array. So we will loop through it, and we will output the, we will do the console.write or the element, or each of the elements in the arrays until that point. It's not an element, I just call it E, sorry. So okay, so that will output the values. Now we of course have to increase the counter for the next number to be entered, and I think that's about all. Well, at the end, let me just do over here console.readline just to pause the screen after the output is all done. So if I go and run it, let's see what I did wrong. Alright, so please enter number between 10 and 100. So let's just say I'll enter 9, which is invalid. It will ask me again, so I'll enter 101, invalid. So I'll enter 10, and it outputs distinct elements and some thousand something. That's definitely wrong. Okay, then let me see. So I got this. I come over here, ask for the input, I validate the input, then I run the for loop, and I'm sure there's just some kind of a logical error, obviously, because it built, so it's not a syntax. And you know what, the way it is, okay, I have the numbers in set to false at the beginning, but when I enter the first number, it remains false the whole time. In other words, I have to come over here and do number in equals false. I have to set it to false for each number before we start processing each of the numbers. I have to set it to false, because it only will become true if it's a duplicate. So let me see if that was the thing that caused that strange issue. So I'll do 10. No, it wasn't that. Distinct elements, 10,000 something. You know, let me run it again. 10, 1, 2, 3. You know, this is not like 100,000. It looks like 100,000, but that's because I don't have a space between each of those numbers. So when I come and output the number, I will also output a space between them. So I think that's what was the problem, but it still will be wrong. But now I see it's 10, 0, 0. Okay, so 0, it says zeros. It outputs every element in the array. Now we initialize the array with 5 elements, and by default they are zeros. But we are only accepting numbers 10 through 100, so we can come over here, and what I'm going to do, a little if statement. Basically it will say if the element is greater or equal to 10, in other words, if it's not 0, which is the default value of the kind of like an empty array, then output this. In other words, don't output any zeros, only output the actual values that were entered. So let me run it again. It still won't be right because it still outputs the heading all like 5 times, but it now see it only outputs 10. It doesn't eliminate, it eliminated the 0, and it adds 10 to each of these. Okay, so I have this console.writeLine, so I have to place it somewhere else. And in fact, it's not that this is so it loops 5 times for each number that we check, because it's within the for loop. It's supposed to be outside the for loop. In fact, the whole thing after this should be outside the loop. for loop ends only here. We will check the number if it's a duplicate, and if it is not, then we will add it to the counter, which in fact is we can take out of the loop too. There you go. All we do within the loop is to check the number against the value that is already in the array. So all this I can let me just move it. So that's the loop ends here. If this is set to true, then this will become false. The number will not be entered into the array, but we still want to output all the array after each entry. So now it will output the distinct elements only once, and it will loop through the values. So let's see if that's gonna work now. So if I enter 10, and it goes through, but it doesn't. It outputs distinct elements 10, and everything's crammed on one line. Then it goes over here and asks for another number. So over here, after the for each loop, all I have to do is now just to do console.writeLine, just to move to the next line so each input is on its own line. So 10, I enter 10 and it says distinct elements 10. I enter 20 and it says distinct elements 10 and 20. Now I enter 10 again, so it's a duplicate, so it ignores it and it outputs distinct elements 10 and 20. It ignores the last 10, it's not in the array. So I do 30, distinct elements 20, 10, 20, 30, and 40, and now it's the last one, distinct elements 10, 20, 30, and 40, and it's the end of the loop. Alright, so yeah, I think it's working now. Yeah, it's just a matter of what is within the loop and what is outside of the loop. So let me check the boundary. So I'll do 9, I'll do 101, so it doesn't take it. I'll take 10 again, and it takes it, and it says distinct elements 10, and ask for the next number, 20, 30, 40, 50, and we have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. All of them are distinct, so they all are output. And let me try it one more time with some first I'll start with wrong values again, and now I'll 10, 20, 30, 10, 20. So 10 and 20 was entered twice, so it ignored it the second time, and we have 10, 20, and 30 only from the first input. So it's finally working as expected. Alright, so let's recap quickly. We have our number, that's the number that the user enters. We have the Boolean number in that will check or will be set to false or true depending on whether or not the number is a duplicate. Then we have the counter, which basically is the corresponds with the number that we are entering, and I'm starting from 0. That way I can use it directly as an index for the array. And here is our array with five elements, and they are initialized by default to 0 because they're integers. So we go to our while loop and we count until for 5, or we loop 5 times from 0 to 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We will set the number into false for each number, for each individual loop, for each iteration of the loop, and then we'll ask the user to enter the number 10 to 100. We will capture that number and check it to make sure that it is indeed between 10 and 100. If it's not, we will ask the user to re-enter the number. Then we come over here to our for loop, and the for loop basically loops 5 times, but we use the numbers.length. In other words, as many elements they are, it goes through each element. So it comes element 0, and it checks if that element 0 or the is equal to the number that the user entered. If it is true, it assigns the number in the boolean that we declared to true, and it goes to another one. But it won't matter anymore because this is already set true, so nothing else will happen. So, but it will finish the loop. But let's say it's not the same one, so this is still false because we set it to false in the beginning of the loop of the while loop, and then it comes over here again, and now I equals 1. So it checks if the element 1, or with the index 1, equals to the number that the user entered. If not, nothing is changed. This remains false, and it comes over here still and checks it again. If none of them is the same, if there's no duplicate, with number in will not change. It will remain false. If one of them is a duplicate, it will be set to true. Over here we check if number in is false, which means that there were no duplicates. And if there were no more duplicates, then we know that the number that the user entered can be added to our array of numbers because it's a distinct value, and we added this in this line. Then we'll simply write distinct elements, and we use the right instead of right line, and then we will loop through each element in the array of numbers. We will output each of the elements as long as it's greater than 10. That's because we could also say if e not equals to 0. Again, when we initialize the the array with 5 elements, they all equal to 0 by default. So that's all we are doing. We do not want to output the elements of zeros because those were not valid values. Those are basically the empty ones. So if they are not empty, if it's an actual value, then we will output it and add an empty space and an output next one next to it. Then over here we will move to a new line and increase the counter and go to another to the second number, and we will repeat it 5 times. So that's that for this exercise. I hope you were able to follow what I was doing and it helped you, and I will see you next time. Take care.